Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about books and stuff. And today we're going to do the thing that I said I would do, and for once I'm going to keep that, and that is to talk about a bit about both Termination Shock by Neal Stephenson and The Ministry for the Future by Stanley Robinson. I recently read both of those, and since they kind of deal with the same topic, that is climate change, and are both rather recent releases. One of them is like, I don't know, 2 weeks old. The other one's not even 2 weeks. Well, a bit of a week old, and the other one is about a year old. I figured it makes sense to compare those two and talk a bit about, why science fiction literature should actually deal with stuff like climate change and, all of that good stuff. I hope all of my ramblings will make sense, but once again, my brain's pretty fucking scrambled right now because of that heavy metal festival I still have to organize for next Saturday and Friday. If you're in the area and want to see some epic metal from all over the world, and the plague rules will still allow us to do it, come by and enjoy Riddle of Steel. I might still do a video on how not to organize a festival and stuff, if that's something you want to hear about. We'll see how that goes, because there might be me being angry about the plague and stuff in there. We'll see. Let me know in the comments if that's something for you. Otherwise, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, great, you made it. Please like and subscribe and do all those good things, and let's go, right? Cheers. Alright, now let's start with the basics. First of all, climate change is real. The, thinking part of this planet has known it for a long time, but since the thinking part of this planet is not necessarily the ruling part of this planet, or part of the thinking part of this planet are also part of the cynical part of the planet, we still haven't done anything about it, and that sucks. So now we got those basics out of the way. Let's look at where we're going from here. First of all, this will be political, but science fiction is political by nature. There is no non-political science fiction out there. Just as a basic, that's sort of where we're starting here. Obviously, this will be full spoiler for both books. That's kind of part of the reason why I'm doing this after those two. The other one is obviously that I needed to actually read them. Okay, so science fiction books are political. Technically, almost all books are political by the simple expedience of, by the reason of, depicting a specific world that is filtered through first the mind of the writer, and then the mind of the reader. And the way you think about specific things, whether it's how relationships are described, whether it's how the world is described, that's always political, by definition. You can't do non-political science fiction, you can't do non-political fiction in general, you can't do... Yeah, I know. Sounds bad for those of us who want, or those of you who want non-political stuff in art, but art is always political. That's just the truth. Anyway, to start from this, science fiction is more overtly political because we're talking about books that most of the time talk about the future. And if I sit down and write a science fiction story and imagine what the future will be, that choice of what kind of future I will describe, what I will make up in my brain to put on, paper or an audiobook or an ebook reader, yes, that is always political because I just show one version of the future. Now, the way I describe that, I can either write a dystopia, your classic 1984s, where it's like, look, if we don't change, this is where we'll end up. Or I can write a utopia. I'm like, look, if we actually get our shit together, this will be where we'll go, and it will be fucking awesome, and we'll be Star Trek, and no money, and also, replicator food, which is maybe not so good. Who knows? The point is, those are political decisions that I make as an artist when I produce science fiction art. So, that's the next big thing that we need to understand here. So this will be political, whether we want it or not. Alright, now, since the dawn of time, or at least the dawn of science fiction literature, which is shortly thereafter, we have always looked at problems in our personal world right now, and then extrapolated them to the future and come up with magical or not so magical, technological, societal, or whatever solutions to those problems to either arrive at that terrible dystopia or at that wonderful utopia, or it's something in between, depending on what you're looking at in your sci-fis, right? You could technically go and read something like Brave New World as a utopia. Works fine, right? If you're very much into psychedelics, which Aldous Huxley kind of was. But the point is that this is a very old tradition of science fiction. In the last couple of, decades, well, like the last 2 decades or so, I don't know, a lot of science fiction was focusing way more on, cool action, cool plot and whatnot than going all deep into the this is how we solve problems side of things. But it was always there underlying it. There have always been authors that have lent more into that classic way of like looking at specific problems kind of thing that you see with your Isaac Asimovs and whatnot in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where you look way closer at those problems. So, where are we standing with our two guys, both Neal Stephenson and Stanley Robinson in their new books? They both look at the problem of climate change, which is something that is real and is happening right now, and has been happening for a long time, and they both seem to agree that we're basically fucked unless we do something. Which is, a good start to things. And from there on out, they kind of do very different things to deal with the problem. I feel it's important to look at both the things that they have in common and the things that they differ with. Now, to put it right up front, one of the things that they have in common is the technology of geoengineering. Both of those authors seem to think that claim in their novels at least, that geoengineering is an important part of, if not the only part of, how to change our climate back to where it is actually, maybe possible to survive. Neal Stephenson and Stanley Robinson both choose one specific technology, one specific form of geoengineering, that being blowing stuff into the atmosphere to simulate a volcanic explosion. They both choose that word, we call it Pinatubo, or connected to the Pinatubo eruption from, was it 1990, something like that? I'm not good with dates. Anyway, so that's basically what they're doing. They're like, this is a technology, it's on the table, we should probably do it. And then they go into different ways of looking at whether that is the only thing we should do or there should be other aspects to it. Neal Stephenson is focusing heavily on that one technology and the implications of using that technology on societies and people, whereas Stanley Robinson is looking more at this is one specific piece of the puzzle, and there need to be a lot of other things that also need to change to get to a maybe survivable future. Which one of those two is the more reasonable approach? I don't want to say. I personally appreciate the ideas of Stanley Robinson more than I appreciate Neal Stephenson's approach, or idea on how to solve climate change, but I personally also appreciate Neal Stephenson's way of writing books more than I appreciate Stanley Robinson's. So while I think Stanley Robinson is right, I think Neal Stephenson is more enjoyable. So I enjoy. At the end, I think both books are worth reading, and for different reasons. Because that's the other part. Both authors are aware and agree on the fact that using geoengineering is not popular. Geoengineering, like a lot of large-scale technologies, have one big problem. They may solve something that people from the more environmentalist side of the aisle want solved, that is climate change and so forth. But because, and this is me putting more information in here, but because of how over the last century and a half or 2 centuries, advances in technology have basically been synonymous with actually destroying the world more, destroying the environment more. Fighting technological progress is ingrained deeply in the DNA of the environmentalist movements, or a large part of the environmentalist movements. Whether it's genetic engineering, whether it's geoengineering, a lot of this stuff, people on the from of the diverse green parties really hate that stuff. Because environmentalism at its heart is a conservative movement, a very conservative movement, conservative in the Burkean sense, right? It's like you want things to stay the way they were centuries ago. You want, that's sort of what you want basically in that area when it comes to the environment. So tinkering with shit to make sure that it will stay on this planet is very difficult. So there will be repercussions in that area, and it's something that we have see both. Like, I mean, Stephenson is leaning more into that than Kim Stanley Robinson is, into that, like the problem that you have with the environmentalist movement compared to the just general people not being happy if one person does something and they're not asked before that. That's the other side of it. But Stephenson is leaning heavily into it, and it's certainly an aspect to be known that geoengineering as one tool in our toolbox to fight climate change is not the most popular one, especially with those people that are mostly focusing on how to get, currently on like pressuring people to do something about climate change. And there's definitely that's sort of the big problem that Neal Stephenson faces more than Kim Stanley Robinson does, because Neal Stephenson basically wants the rest of the world to just keep on moving and just solve our problems with technology, which, is a more liberal, dare I say, neoliberal, libertarian approach to things. Technologies will solve our problems and we will not have to change how we live. Which is why there's a lot of people still driving around with all kinds of heavily fueled vehicles and whatnot in his novel. Whereas Kim Stanley Robinson thinks that we cannot solve the problem of climate change at this point just by technological progress, but also by changing our societies, heavily changing our societies. The next big thing that is important to look at with both authors is they are both authors that are aware of the global problem of climate change, right? Those will be problems that the global society, the world, will have to solve, because the impacts will be global and are already global. It's like you're living in the Western world, you're probably still halfway, I mean, unless you're living in British Columbia or anywhere in Canada, I guess. But apart from that, you're pretty safe for now from most of the stuff that's going on with climate change. But it will come to us just the same. So we kind of know that and have known it for a long time. But other countries like, say, China or India will be way heavier, will be influenced much more or much faster by the problems of climate change, the impacts of climate change. And that is why both India and China play a larger role in both novels. They're heavily focused on what is going on in East Asia. Now you can look at why it's still not Africa, because Africa will obviously also have will be impacted heavily by climate change. Kim Stanley Robinson has a look at Africa, at least at parts of Africa. Neal Stephenson, not really. There's obviously a bit of a conversation about Saudi Arabia and how Saudi Arabia needs to obviously also switch from just an oil-based industry to something else, which, has already started. I guess in parts somewhere they're at least thinking about using, stuff like solar power, but that's as African as it gets with Neal Stephenson this time round. And yes, I'm aware that this is not Africa. It's just as close geographically to Africa as you get in that novel. But yeah, both focus heavily on India as one of the most important countries for the next 50 years at least when it comes to like global development, because it is a huge country. It is very heavily impacted by climate change already, and it sits right next to China, which is the other huge player right now. So whatever kind of thing the world wants to change in the next couple of years, better have both sides, both countries on their side, because they are nuclear powers and they tend to, not like each other that much, at least, in some areas. So that is an important thing that I think we can take from both novels to look at. Yes, India and China will be where a lot of that stuff will be negotiated at in the near future. All right, the next thing that both kind of have in common, although it's more heavily like a thing with Kim Stanley Robinson, is that, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Neal Stephenson, but Kim Stanley Robinson starts it with a bang there, right? Is the problem, or the sad truth, that it's basically already too late, but since human global societies are so slow for all kinds of reasons, and they probably have different answers of why that is the case, that it needs a really big catastrophe to get our asses moving globally speaking, and even then it'll most likely only be the people that are directly impacted that will start to move shit, because the rest is still super slow. Now, Kim Stanley Robinson, it's a huge heat wave that kills off a couple of million people in India in, I don't know, fictitious next year or the year after or something like that. That starts India on that whole way to become a greener country in a lot of ways. With Neal Stephenson, it's more like stuff that's happening in Texas, and then later on like a giant tsunami or giant flood waves and stuff in all over the world, because Neal Stephenson is focusing heavily on the rise of the sea level rise and not on all kinds of other aspects of it, because he thinks, or kind of claims, or whatever, portrays the way that we can solve rising heat through some kind of cooling devices like that sound a lot like he's been watching or reading too much Dune recently, which, y'all should do that, because those are really good books, and it's a pretty decent movie, even though I had a lot of issues with it. But that's sort of the idea. It's like we need, because we're super slow, apparently we're dumb. I mean, once again, look at Canada right now. It's like, you guys are fucked. But you're still not actually starting to do something or much more about climate change. Same with Kim Stanley Robinson. Like, yes, we basically need a bunch of like kicks in the balls before we get off our asses. Now, Neal Stephenson's answer to that is there are people already out there that know that we need to do stuff. And since I said he's like more on the like technology solve stuff and more on the libertarian, liberal, neoliberal, whatever side of things politically, his idea is to have like one person, in this case a tech billionaire, well, not only tech billionaire, but a billionaire that has at least ideas of tech, start to do climate change because the countries are too slow. Once again, I do know that democracies are rather slow in a lot of ways. I do know that, but I don't believe in the fact that just, the idea of having Elon Musk actually do something decent, and that will save humanity, is something that I personally don't think will work. But it's still like an interesting idea. Is like maybe it has to be like individuals with the technology and the power to start moving stuff, because otherwise it will never happen, because there's so many people out there that still have a large interest, a vested interest in not changing too fast, in not changing things at all. So that approach is one approach. Like Kim Stanley Robinson's approach is that we have a lot of small grassroots movements already that either want to change how economies work, because our current economy is obviously like global the global market and so forth are currently the way they are running, because it's inherent to that, to how they run, at least according to Kim Stanley Robinson and other people that are more on the left side of things, contributing to slowing down our reaction to climate change. Because so far, short-term wins are still possible by not not doing anything about climate change. So the approach there would be to say we have all these kind of local grassroots movements that change our economy, that change how we think about goods, how we think about markets, how we think about governance. And what we need to do is to link up all these smaller ideas to actually have the grassroots, revolution, or at least evolution, that to go like hand in hand with technological changes, because otherwise it will just not happen in any meaningful way. And with an entire country like India, and Stanley Robinson focuses a lot more on like Indian culture and history and how that country, which is basically, a huge place with all kinds of different cultures in it, would be a good place to have all these different smaller things stored. That are, at least according to Kim Stanley Robinson, I'm not an expert on Indian history, that are, already rooted in all kinds of cultural traditions. So actually, overcoming the toxic parts of one's tradition and one's history and focusing on the things that are usable for the future, plus having a national trauma. In this case, it's like projected heat wave that kills, as I said, like I think 20 million people, something like that. Anyway, gigantic number of people, which is not unlikely or not unreasonable. Anyway, point is that trauma driving those smaller efforts, those regional efforts to move forward, leading to a actual like change in general Indian politics, and then actually, because it's a huge country with enough global power at this point, economic power and whatnot, to actually also, move forward within and have power within the international community. That's the important thing with Kim Stanley Robinson and the idea of the Ministry of the Future being a subsidy or something connected to the United Nations. This is, as I said, like this is an effort that we as a species, as humanity, make together to go somewhere, and not an individual that actually kind of is smart and sees where we are heading, and that one individual throwing its weight around to change things. The great man of history theory is not Kim Stanley Robinson's way, and I agree with that, which, I said it on the outside, I think Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future is very much a program to look at and follow and see how all these small individual efforts all over the place will lead to success. Or will be the more viable way for the future. Now, obviously, both authors, not both sides, but both authors are aware of the fact that there will be repercussions, there will be resistance, and yes, even Kim Stanley Robinson has that fact that yes, there will be eco-terrorism. It has already been there, and there are maybe some people that need to be forcefully removed from continuing to destroy the planet. Is he advertising executions, terrorist acts, and so forth? No, he's not. But it's like, if we don't change, at some point, some people will just have had enough and go out and do it. That's the sad part. That's like that whole idea. If you keep disenfranchising people from, choices that impact their lives and their families' lives, and everyone they know, some people will not take that at some point. So there is that aspect to it. And in a way, you have similar aspects in Neal Stephenson's story, although he doesn't go like fully into eco-terrorism. He's more concerned with hating China, I think. At least in some ways. So, another thing that I personally think is interesting to look at is the perspectives. As I said before, Ministry of the Future has that global perspective. It does not really, in the way it is constructed, with all these small reports and like a mosaic, basically, of all these different, almost journalistic or pseudo-journalistic pieces about all kinds of bits and pieces happening on the planet, lend itself to have too close a look at personal impact. Neal Stephenson, on the other hand, with his like 3, 4, 5 main characters, is able to show how, and this is, I think that's the bit where we kind of need both books in a way, because it's easy to sit back and say, like, on a global level we need to do this and this and this and this, and we have all these small co-ops doing these things, and we have this, and everyone is happy. In the greater scheme of things, yes. However, in, like, on the personal level, no. And yes, there is obviously that story with Jack. Is it Jack? No, it's not Jack, but you know what I mean. The guy in Kim Stanley Robinson's novel, who survives the heat wave at the beginning and then does all the dumb shit. That guy. God, my brain's a mess. I only read that like 2 weeks ago. Anyway, I think it's Jack. Anyway, that guy, where you see that some people will suffer and whatnot, but it's not the same level, I guess, because it might also just be rooted in Kim Stanley Robinson's more distanced way of writing, or like distance from the characters, whereas Neal Stephenson just picks out people from very different walks of life and then sends them through those individual, journeys that show those very direct personal repercussions that both climate change right now and the things that can come from having climate change, or from doing something about climate change, those personal repercussions. And I think it's important to understand that, because while I personally believe that we can solve a global problem like climate change only on a global scale, it also is also important to keep in mind that there are individuals, that each human being is an individual, and those things will have very individual, very personal repercussions and problems. And to just wipe that away with but it's the greater good argument doesn't really work, unfortunately, because while it is true that it is the greater good to do these and these and these and these things, unfortunately, as individuals, we rarely care about the greater good. We're not Mr. Spock. We're pretty selfish assholes most of the time. And it's exactly that part that we need to keep in mind. And while I'm always happy to tell individuals that they're stupid idiots and selfish bastards, we need to be aware of that fact and need to find ways to take that bit and overcome that problem, because unless we do that, we'll have all those conservative assholes that go like, oh, look at all the people protesting climate change, they're still using mobile phones, they're still doing all these things that are not good for the climate. Yes, that's true, but on the other hand, we need those things. That's not an argument to not do something yourself. So being aware of the personal level, or the personal impact, is important, and is why I think reading Termination Shock will, in a way, help you understand that part, because, as I said, those are people, those people are on different sides on the program to solve climate change and whatnot, but all of them are individually impacted by it. And it's one of those things that I feel we tend to often underestimate as people in general. It's like, yes, we can go out and we can protest and we can plan, we can do all of these things, but there will come a point in time. There will come a point in time where this will have like very personal and unforeseen consequences for each and every one of us, right? That's so difficult to understand. It's like, yes, it's not about deciding to live vegan or only eat like regional foods and whatnot, which, yeah, that's a good contribution, but that's a voluntary contribution. And there will come points in time relatively soon for each and every one of us where dealing with climate change will have personal consequences that are not by our own choosing, but by the universe being the universe and fucking us. And what Neal Stephenson manages to do better than Kim Stanley Robinson is to show that part of it. As I said, Kim Stanley Robinson does it, but because of the way he writes, the way he describes things, it feels a bit more distant. It doesn't feel as visceral. And I'm a firm believer in that, I'm a firm believer that we need to, when we consume fiction, We need visceral fiction to kick us awake so we can actually make that connection to our own personal life, because otherwise it's just like reading the news or watching the news and disconnecting. And that chance of disconnect is unfortunately higher, I feel, with Kim Stanley Robinson's book, because it has this like pseudo-journalistic approach to large parts of it. All right. Another important bit is nature. The beauty of nature. One of the things that I didn't talk about too much in the longer discussion of Ministry of the Future, for the Future, is how poetic Kim Stanley Robinson writes about nature, about animals, about plants, like all of the things, about nature, basically. Neal Stephenson doesn't do that. He's not a good nature writer. He, has some animals that are good animals. There's bad animals, which, are pigs, and, well, literally, they are pigs. And while I personally hate raccoons more than I hate pigs, I do see the point there. The idea is, for Neal Stephenson, that nature and animals are, like, nature is a huge machine of individual beasts, individual parts, which are species, that we can manipulate and push around. And if we fuck it up, that machine will bite our ass off, which, yeah, you ever faced a boar in the wild? Yes, that's literally what will happen. Anyway, my point is that Kim Stanley Robinson, through describing the beauty of nature in all these like almost lyrical prose, in this wonderful poetic part, makes a case for not only saving our human arses, which is what Neal Stephenson does, but for saving the planet as a whole, as a biosphere. Now, you can talk about the idea of that Gaia hypothesis, which is something that Stephen Erickson talks about in Rejoice, which is another one of those books that I feel I could probably have also taken into account here, which is much closer to Kim Stanley Robinson in a way. But that idea that, yes, we need to save the entire ecosystem. We don't need to just like make sure that us humans survive and our real estate survives. We need to make sure to save as much of the biosphere to keep the biosphere running and being itself. That's sort of the aspect that I feel Stevenson falls short, because it seems to not be his main interest right now. He doesn't care that much about it. It's like, as long as we humans survive and all the animals we like survive, we'll be pretty good. We can use technology to make sure that that will happen. Whereas Kim Stanley Robinson tries to show us how beautiful like nature as a whole is, and how great it is to have all these cool animals just roaming around, how beautiful just parts of our planet are. And I feel in this regard that Robinson's approach is the better approach. It's an important approach. It's an, I don't know. I think it's the right approach, because if we as humans want, like as a species, want to survive, we need to actually start to care about the planet as a whole. We need to start and care about our world, and probably liking it and figuring out how wonderful it is a good way. Whereas seeing how threatening wild boars can become because they run rampant because we fucked up the planet, that just scares. And I feel the positive approach is the more long-term, the more sustainable one. The other one might just work short-term. But as I say, like, short-term seems to be more where Stephenson is heading with his novel. So, there's that. I should have probably actually taken Rejoice into account more. It's much closer to Ministry for the Future, but I kind of forgot that I should probably reread that one as well. I'll probably do just a Rejoice reading at some point, because I think it's worth reading. But yeah. That's sort of more or less all I wanted to talk about today. As I said, I think both books are valid. Both books are valuable right now. They're important, because if two authors that are so far apart politically both agree on the main thing, that it's way past time we got off our asses to change, to do something about climate change. We should probably take it seriously. It also means that because they have very different audiences, they have very different approaches, we might actually reach different parts of human society, of at least of the reading part of society in the reading West. But it's still, that's a part of humanity. It might really maybe help to reach people that are not already thinking hard about how to deal with climate change, and so there is a contribution there that I think is important to value about it. All right. The other obviously important thing is to read both books and to think about those ideas, because that's the strength of science fiction, of speculative fiction. Whether you think of it as political or not, it's both political and hypothetical in a lot of ways. Like, these are ideas of how it will play out or how it could play out. So what we should do is go and read both of them and then think and look at other stuff and try to come up with our own ideas and our own thoughts on what we think is true and what we think is wrong and how we would engage with it. This is fiction. Both of those are fictions. Kim Stanley Robinson maybe a bit more than Neal Stephenson, but both of those are books that are not just made to read and to entertain you. Those are books that want you to think, to engage, and ideally translate that experience of reading and thinking into actual action, which is something that we kind of tend to forget, but that's something that literature can do and should do. And in that regard, both books are great literature, and I recommend you read both of those. All right, that's it for now. If you have read both books, or if you plan to read both books, or whatever, please let me know what you think in general down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I'll be back with something else tomorrow. Let me know if you want me to talk about the heavy metal festival I'm organizing. And yeah, see you soon. Cheers.